Welcome to the show, Tracy.
Thanks.
So, my favorite question to ask is, what's your sobriety date? What's your recovery date?
My sobriety date is October 31st, 2022.
Oh,
So
wow. So,
I'm
you're coming up on two
getting ready to
years.
celebrate 2 years.
By the time this comes out, you've already celebrated that 2 years.
Yes, yes.
So, what was going on October 30th of 2022?
Well, I honestly don't remember a whole lot about the day before I went into my first meeting. I I just know that I woke up. It was a Sunday because Monday, my first meeting was on a Monday. So that Sunday, I remember getting up and coming down and having coffee and putting Jameson in my coffee, which wasn't something I did every day, but I did do it that morning. And then I remember later in the day, um, I had a boyfriend at the time. He was living with me, and I remember by the time he got up, he worked nighttime. I remember by the time he got up, I was already drunk. I had already drank the bottle of Jameson that I had wasn't open, so I drank a full bottle of Jameson by the time he got up. He decided not to go to work because we had drank so much the night before. So he was pretty sick and hungover. So he decided not to go to work, which was like a great thing for me because then I was like, okay, well, we just get to keep drinking. And that's what we did. We went, I remember going to the liquor store and getting a bunch of beer, and that's really all I remember of that day. I have a couple little flashes of like laying on the ground and um
Were you a big Jameson drinker?
no, actually I wasn't. I This is actually my second time trying to get sober. Before the first time I
Okay.
tried to get sober, I was a vodka drinker. I was drinking
Okay.
like, I had bottles of vodka up in my closet. I was vodka wine. I went into a detox and I did a IOP. So I had gotten sober, but I didn't do AA at all. So I had stayed sober about 7 or 8 months that time without, working any kind of program. Just like I said, I did a
Willpower.
detox, I did a IOP. So then when I started drinking again, I said, okay, well, I'm not going to drink vodka this time. For the most part, I didn't. So I just drank beer, but I was drinking like I would purposely pick out like the highest volume IPAs, like,
Yeah.
I was drinking the triple IPAs and then I started drinking Jameson a little bit. My boyfriend at the time, he was into Jameson, so yeah, so my last drunk was mainly Jameson beer.
That's
It,
quite a mixture, too, going from Jameson to beer. I remember one night my brother's not an alcoholic. He can drink more than I can whenever we used to drink together.
mhm,
But he's nowhere near an alcoholic like I was.
mhm.
And one night we challenged each other to go shot for shot with tequila. We had a bottle of Patron each, and we did 17 shots each back to back. And we were still sitting there. Neither of us tapped out, and we were like, okay, well, I guess we'll go to Jameson. And we both did a shot of Jameson, and after that we were like, all right, we're done. Like,
Yeah,
we'll call it a draw. Nobody
yeah.
won, nobody lost. Like, I can't do another shot of Jameson after doing all that tequila. So I know Jameson is quite the mixture with anything. Where are you from?
Baltimore.
Oh, okay, not far from me. I
Yeah.
love Baltimore. Some of the best crab I've ever had was in Baltimore.
Oh,
Uh,
yeah. Yeah, we like our crab here in Baltimore.
yeah, the first time I ever had crab cakes was in Baltimore,
Well, that's
and
really the only place you should ever eat a crab cake is in Baltimore.
well, I lived in Massachusetts for a little while, and they were pretty good up there too. Not quite
Mm.
the same, but they were seafood was really good up there. Lobster's really good up there.
Oh,
Uh,
yeah.
I would say that's more their staple is lobster. So you grew up in Baltimore. Did you? When did you discover alcohol? How old were you?
Well, I should probably Yes, I grew up in Baltimore, but I had a father that lived in Florida. I was originally from Florida, originally from Clearwater, Florida. That's where I was born. Lived there till I was 2. My parents divorced, so my mom moved up here. So I grew up
Okay.
here, but my dad lived in Florida. So I would spend every summer of my life I would spend in Florida, to the point where the first summer I actually spent in Maryland, and we were going to go, like, 4th of July, we were going to go see fireworks. I was like in shock. Like, I just thought the only place they did fireworks was on the beach in Clearwater, because that's just what I had always done for 4th of July.
Yeah.
But and I was kind of a late bloomer to drinking. I had a sister who was 10 years older than me. So I would go with her sometimes and party. I mean, drugs are a very small part of my story. I experimented and all that with her.
Well, let's see.
Um,
I want to go back. So you're a child of divorce,
yes.
and your sister's 10 years older than you. You said.
Yeah.
Any other siblings?
Yeah. I also have a brother that's 10 years younger than me.
From your mom?
My mom is passed. She's been passed for about 17 years now. My mom was actually an addict. She was, um, it's my understanding she was addicted to pills way before I was ever even born. And I kind of, like, I remember being like maybe 4 or 5 years old and being in the car with my mom and my sister, and they were like smoking weed, like, with me in the back seat. Um, and I remember always, like, my mom telling me to, tell people she wasn't there, go to the door, tell people she wasn't there, answer the phone, say she wasn't there. Um, just always stuff like that. Like, one time I found pills and I found weed in her purse, and like, my dad lived in Florida, like I said, and my dad was a cop. So, I had this very, like, contradiction in existence, so to speak. Like, up here,
Yeah.
um, was my mom. And my mom was, we were pretty poor up until she met my stepdad. When I was 4, she met my stepdad and they got married, but he was an alcoholic, and he was a violent alcoholic. Like, my first introduction to my stepdad was he had come to our apartment and tore up our house looking for my mom. Like, me and my mom, I do remember this, like, me and my mom, like, took off to go to my aunt's house because my stepdad, like, called her and said he was going to come kill her. So, like, we took off to my aunt's, and then I remember going back to the apartment the next day and it just being destroyed. Um, but whatever, they ended up, I don't know the real details of that, but they ended up getting married. And I remember a few years later, like, my stepdad going to a rehab. And I didn't know the details because I was too young, and it was
Yeah.
just not something that we just didn't talk about it. I just remember going
It
up to
wasn't
see
really
him on
talked about back
weekends.
then. Yeah, it wasn't really talked about back then. Addiction wasn't really a topic until, I would say, the last 5 or 10 years.
Mhm.
Addiction's been more talked about, and I feel like it's because of social media. People
Yeah.
can get their stories out there, because my addiction, I didn't know people were getting sober when I was in addiction, when I was drinking. I knew celebrities that said they didn't drink anymore, and I thought, "Oh, okay, they don't drink anymore. That's different." But I didn't understand what alcoholism or what addiction was like until I was introduced to recovery in 2018. And that's when I started going to meetings. I went through many different fellowships, and I loved both of them. And I found recovery in both of them. I went through the steps. Like, it was amazing. And I feel like ever since I started my show, I've connected with people from all over the world. And, they'll tell me how they recover out loud. And I see them posting it on their Facebook. I'm 2 years and 3 months clean today, blah, 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 and celebrating their recovery. And I wasn't seeing that on social media 6 years ago when I first got clean. You know what I mean? I wasn't seeing people celebrating their recovery in a way that they were putting themselves out there. And I think it's become more and more of a norm than what it was. How old are you?
I'm 51.
Okay, so in the 80s and 90s, it definitely wasn't really discussed at all, in my opinion. I grew up in the 80s and 90s too, and I definitely didn't hear about it until the late 2010s. Um, so yours is your brother from your mom's side or your dad's side?
Both my siblings are from my mom.
Oh,
Um,
okay.
and we all three of us have different fathers.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Was your mom married multiple times?
Oh yeah. Yeah, she was married like 4 times.
Okay. Yeah, I've had
Yeah.
people on here with moms that have been married 5, 6 times. Some of them, one of them was to the same man twice. So
Uh,
I've heard all the different kind of scenarios that you can imagine.
yeah.
Um, so that was pretty traumatic for you then, being that young and seeing your apartment tore up when you came back home, I'm sure.
I mean, I guess it was. I probably, to be honest, I really haven't even thought about that kind of stuff up until the last, I guess, year or so. Um, I mean, yeah, I just kind of went with the flow. I mean, there were some other traumatic things that happened like around that time. I had an uncle that was abusive. And we went to court for all that, and I have no idea the result of it. I was like I said, I was like maybe 5 years old. I do remember being in court because of it, but that's really it's like very vague memories about it.
Yeah.
Um, and and I remember also like my mom telling me not to tell my dad about it. And I think I told him like several years later, just like in conversation, like we were having dinner and I said something about going to court. He was like, "What? What did you go to court for?" And then I told him
Yeah.
what happened. And, and I think later on, like my stepmom told me that he had like called and talked to my mom but I didn't know the details about it. Like it was just not anything we talked about. And so yeah, my alcoholic drinking didn't really start until my 30s, but I definitely had a lot of the other isms. Like I um was very, always so insecure, um very much introvert. Like I really didn't have any friends in school. I was picked on a lot. I was bullied tremendously in middle school. Um,
Me too.
I
I know what
One time
that's
I
like.
got kicked out of brownies because my mom spent the cookie money. So I think like that made me very introverted. Like that between the
Yeah.
whole brownie thing, and then there was another time where she like let me sign up for gymnastics, and I went there and like they weren't calling on me, and I found out she never sent the money in. So I just remember like sitting there just by myself, like crying, not knowing what was going on. And then she picked me up, and I think like somebody probably talked to her and told her why I wasn't able to participate. And I think that those experiences just made me very introverted. So when I would go to school, I wouldn't talk to anybody. I was just very much kept to myself. So I didn't really get in with the bad kids. And I was like, I shouldn't say bad kids, but I didn't get in with all the partiers. I just kind of kept
Yeah.
to myself. But boys were a thing. Like, so by the time I was 18, um I had 2
That's
kids.
funny.
I had my son at
Well,
16, and then I had a daughter at 18.
okay. We
And for my 20s, I was just mom. Like I
yeah.
worked really hard. I got a job. I was married, and I was just mom and wife. And then in my 30s is when once I got single, my kids were a little older and a little bit more independent. That's when my drinking really kind of started. And
Well, let's backtrack a little bit. So I was bullied too for my size. I'm a bigger guy.
mhm,
So I've always been made fun of about it, and by like my best friends, you know what I
mhm,
mean? And I kind of took the other road where I was first introduced to alcohol when I was 11, and when I was 12 I started drinking alcoholically. And
mhm,
I don't mean that I was drinking every day when I was 12 years old, but on days that I was bullied a lot or had a bad day at school or somebody passed away, I was going to drink about it and hide it in my room to feel better. I was drinking Captain Morgan back then. That was my first introduction to alcohol when I was 11, was Captain and Coke. So
mhm,
I would make myself a tall glass of Captain and Coke and I would go hide it up in my room because I lived in the old attic we converted into a bedroom. so nobody was ever coming up there. So I was good to drink up there and kind of drink my day away and feel better about my day. So
Mhm.
that's what I mean by I was drinking alcoholically. So you had your first kid when you were 16. How old was the father?
The father was 24.
Okay. The way you pause, I'm like, here we go. It's a little bit older.
Yeah,
uh,
yeah, it
how did you
definitely
guys
was.
meet? How did you guys meet
Um,
if you were 16?
I'm sorry, say that again?
How did you guys meet if you were 16?
At a carnival. Yeah,
Okay.
just a carnival. Like, we just, like, walked by each other, caught each other's eyes, started talking, and yeah. So,
Okay. And was he the father of the 18 to when you were 18?
no, no, um I mean, he and I did not last much longer after my son was born. Um, he yeah, some pretty traumatic things happened, and then he was gone, and, then I met my first who would end up being my first husband, the father of my daughter, who was my second child, and, when I found out I was pregnant, I was like, "Well, we just have to get married," because I was like, "I can't be 18 years old, have 2 kids, not being married."
Yeah.
Um,
Did you
I
finish high
j just
school?
so we got married, and, like, that night that we got married, I was like, "This was a mistake." Like, "Why do we do this?" Um,
Were you
but
still in high school?
I had graduated high school at that point, yeah.
Okay, so you did finish school even
Yeah,
though
I
you were
gradu yeah, I spent my junior year of high school pregnant, like, my son's birthday is June 19th, so, like, I went and I stayed in school, and I actually performed I stayed on honor roll, I performed and I was pretty studious, I always got really good grades. My plan was I was gonna, you know my plan before I got pregnant was I was gonna graduate high school and move to Florida and go to Florida State and be a Seminole and be a writer. I mean, that was the plan. Um, but obviously plans change, but,
yes, they do.
yeah, they did.
How did you meet your first husband?
Just neighborhood, he was just a guy from the neighborhood. After me and my son's father split up, I was living with my grandmother for a little while. Um, and then my sister and I got an apartment. Um, so we just had an apartment. I went to school, like my senior year of high school. I was just going to school and then I would go to work. And then we would always have people, over at the apartment, partying, whatever. And he was just a guy from the neighborhood that I met. And we, started hanging out. One thing led to another. I become pregnant again, and I made us get married. But I mean, I will say we stayed married 11 years.
Okay.
Um, yeah,
Yeah, that's
and
really
I can honestly say during that time, I mean, we, partied here and there, but like my drinking was not. It just wasn't an issue. Like if we went out and drank one night here or there. It was very, very rare. Like I just, like I said, I was mom. I was just mom. I was wife. I was working. I just worked. We were able to. He worked nighttime. I worked daytime, so we really didn't have to have daycare. So it worked out. But I knew something was wrong with me. Like I was going back and forth to like all kind of psychiatrists and therapists. I was on every anti-anxiety, every antidepressant. I was just miserable, and I did not know why. And then after he
how were you you said drugs are a part of your story too?
very
Were there
little
was
like
that high school or is that in your 20s or
that was in
30s?
my 20s once I got married. Like I never one time when I was like maybe 13, I did mushrooms with my sister. Um, but that was it. Like I never even tried smoking weed until I was like 25 years old.
Mm,
I did snorted coke a couple times, but we were all partying one night at my sister's, and we were snorting coke, and like I walked in on my sister and a friend of ours like cooking it, and I was like, "That's it, I'm done." Like, and I never touched it again.
yeah.
Um, I think just seeing that, like, I also had an uncle who was in and out of addiction with drugs, and seeing my mom, I think it just kinda gave me a healthy fear of
Yeah.
drugs, but just not good enough fear of alcohol. So,
Yeah.
um
Well, alcohol is the unsuspecting predator. You know what I mean? It sneaks up on you because there's so many advertisements, commercials. There's, people talk when you go to a sports game or a sporting event, everyone has a beer in their hand that's $9. And, it's made to look fun on TV.
Mhm,
You ever watch Mad Men about
mhm,
uh, they're drinking in their office, and this is in the 60s, but they're drinking in their office while they work all day. Like there's not a stigma, and people still to this day, there's not a stigma against alcohol. You see moms posting all the time like it's wine time and all that kind of
yes,
shit,
mhm,
and they're basically saying, hey, I'm taking care of my kids, but it's after 6, so I'm drinking wine because I'm a mom,
yes,
and making it socially acceptable to drink during the day. So there's still, unfortunately, not a big stigma against alcohol when people don't realize you can literally die from the withdrawals if you were to stop, suddenly after drinking pretty heavily.
yeah,
There's only two things you can die from when you're withdrawing, and it's alcohol and it's benzos like
mhm,
Xanax. Those
yeah,
are the two, things that you can, like opiate, like my drug of choice was opiates and benzos,
mhm,
and opiates sucked worse. Like it was horrible, but I don't have the chance of dying. But it was just an awful feeling for a couple weeks.
yeah,
But alcohol and benzos, like I had to stop cold turkey, and that was I was under I'm not and I was at a detox, so I was looked after and I was
right.
made to be comfortable, and I got through that too. But still, like alcohol is it's the worst when it comes to coming off of it.
Yeah,
So
and
when
eh, I mean, I know now that, like, alcohol was my coping mechanism, like, I just never eh, because of my family history and the trauma that I did have and not talking about it, like, alcohol just kinda stuffed all those feelings, and when I guess, discovered my solution in my 30s, like, once I was single for the first time. I was going out a little bit and drinking, but my drinking mainly was like at home. Like I just, to me, like to be at home by myself and have a bottle of wine or have some vodka, like that was just glorious to me. Like that was a
yeah,
fun night. And I did that for so long. Um, and it just and I was once I started, I couldn't stop. I would not stop until I was blacked out. And
so when did you and your husband get divorced?
we got divorced. Let me see. Oh
Like
my
how old
god.
were you? 29?
I was like 29. Yeah. Yeah, I was like 29 when we got divorced, and it was like the first time that I had been like truly on my own, and I was like raising two kids. My kids at this point were like maybe 10 and 12, and I started working a second job. So I just was working a lot. Like I was working my full-time job, 50 hours a week. Then I was working a part-time job. And when I started and then one of the part-time jobs was waitressing. And I would get home at night after, leaving my house at 6 o'clock in the morning. I would get home at like 11, 12 o'clock at night, and I'd make a drink and I'd go to bed. And I would say, well, I need to wind down. And I started
Yeah,
doing that. And it was
I
around
deserve
2000. I'm sorry.
I deserve this.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
You start saying that I deserve it.
Yeah. And in 2006, something significant happened. I found out in January of 2006 that my mom had lung cancer. She had stage 4 lung cancer. And and then in March of 2006, I found out that my dad had Lou Gehrig's disease. So, here I am, I'm got all this other stressful stuff going on, and I was seeing somebody at the time, and my drinking definitely started to increase at that point. And the guy I was seeing at the time, he brought it up to me about how much I was drinking, but I just kind of like blew it off. He's like, I know you got a lot going on with your parents, but I'm concerned about your drinking. And I was like, well, what's the big deal? I'm just at home. I'm not driving. I'm not hurting anybody. Like, and you know what? And I'm stressed out. I need it. Like, I just did not see it at all as a big deal. I definitely fought for my right to drink at that point. Um,
Yeah, with
but
everything going on, it's easy to have like, well, what else am I going to do? Like when there was other options, but you had already found the solution to your problems. If you had known that going to therapy would be helpful, or meditating would be helpful, or reaching out to people would, you didn't know those other options. All you knew was alcohol, and why would you search for more options? Because the alcohol is working.
yeah. And I really, sadly, like I had nobody else in my life at that point. Like I had this guy I was seeing. I I just was not very close to my family. What family I did have at that time, I just was not close to them. I didn't really have any friends to speak of. I had acquaintances, but I really didn't have any kind of community, I guess, around me. Like I didn't have anybody to talk to. So I just drank. And you know, and after a while I did end up moving in with that guy. Once my son graduated high school, me and my daughter moved in. And I remember being very fearful about having to not drink once I moved in with him. Like I was scared of that. But once I moved in, like we started going out on the weekends. I truly became like a weekend warrior, and we would drink, go out. And I remember like he would say to me, because like we'd go out, we'd go to a concert, we'd go like just to a bar, and but like I was never done. Like when we got home, I break open another bottle of beer or whatever. And, he would be like, what's wrong with like, and I just always would be like, say the same, what's the big deal? Like, I'm not hurting
Yeah.
anybody. I'm home. Um, and after a while, he and I got, in 2019, he and I got separated. 2020, we got divorced so he and I were married for 11 years. Both my marriages were 11 years. So we got divorced, and then I was single again. And then COVID happened in 2020. My daughter was living in an apartment with me. And when COVID happened, like I was, that's when that's when I started really like drinking like every day. And it became earlier and earlier in the day, later and later at night. Um,
And that's when you were drinking a lot of vodka.
Yeah, yeah, then I started really drinking a lot more vodka. Um,
Would you
like I
drink it
said, I was
straight or would you mix it?
both. I mean, but, sometimes it was right out of the bottle. I mean, it was yeah, it was getting and I started before I got divorced, like I was hiding it from my ex-husband. Like I would keep bottles of wine or bottles of vodka in my nightstand at night. And we'd be like sitting in the living room watching TV, and like I'd be sneaking back and like, taking a drink and then going back. And then by the end of the night, I'd be slurring my words, and he'd be like, "What happened to you?"
Yeah,
Like, because,
that happened to me with my Ben's when my dad passed away last June from stage 4 colon cancer, and I wasn't processing it well. And I had a psychiatrist, and I had, manipulated him into giving me Ativan. And
mm,
then I started using the Ativan, and I started abusing the Ativan. So then he switched me to Valium. And then I learned I could snort the Valium and get higher.
mm,
So I would always we're in a 3-bedroom apartment with 3 full bathrooms.
mhm,
So like I'm in my office where I work from home and do my podcast, and like I have my own bathroom behind me.
mhm,
And so I'm like, oh, I'm running to the bathroom. And really I'd run in here, grab my pills that I had hidden, and snort one real fast and come back out and just like pretend like I was just using the bathroom.
mm.
And really I was just getting high until my wife was like, you're high right now. And like she's sober too, 4.5 years. So I was supposed to be for 4.5 years. So she called me out on it, and I flushed all my medication. and I've been clean since April 1st off
Hmm.
of weed and benzos. I still haven't touched opiates in over 6 years, and I
Hmm.
haven't had a drink. It's funny you mentioned COVID. February 29th, leap day of 2020, my wife and I woke up hungover, and I said, we either need to start drinking now or quit drinking forever. Those are
Hmm.
the two options. Like,
Yeah.
I either need a drink at 11 a.m. or I need to just never do this again.
Yeah.
And she was like, well, I'll quit with you. And she's an alcoholic. And I was like, yeah, because this is a perfect sober date, 229. Like, we can only celebrate every 4 years.
Right.
And, then COVID hit 2 weeks later,
Hmm.
and I couldn't go to meetings. And it's like, okay, now we've really got to buckle down and do this together. And I think that's when the community started coming out more and being more vocal on Facebook and stuff like that, or TikTok, Instagram, Twitter. People started talking about their recovery because they're stuck in the house and they need an outlet. So,
Well, I think, like, as far as that goes, like, I don't hide that I'm in recovery at all. Um, because for me, so that what led me to AA, was, for one, when I did do a IOP, they talked about AA, but I did a couple Zoom meetings and I just was like, it's not for me. But I knew people that I had worked with, and I do have a very dear friend who I knew was in recovery through AA. And he gave me my first big book, which I did not open. Like, at first I wanted nothing to do with it, but that morning of the 31st, when I woke up that morning, I was so sick. I mean, I don't know how I didn't end up in the hospital that weekend. I drank so much. Barely, like I said, I barely remember that day, but I remember when I woke up that morning, I was so, I was already like throwing up every morning. I had been doing that for months. I was like dry heaving every morning.
yeah,
But this morning I was like, I was shaking so violently. I was so sick. And I knew I was like, this has to be done. But I knew what to do. Like, I knew I needed to go to AA, and I knew that it worked, because I knew my friend and I knew other people. And I just don't hide. I understand why some people do, but I don't, because if the people that I knew had done that, I wouldn't have known what to do when I was ready.
yeah,
And and I believe in the power of example, and I you know and I just I pray that my example will show to anybody that I come in contact with, that so if they know, okay, yeah, this is what she was, this is what she is
yeah,
now, and this is how she got there. And
yeah,
if I can be that
You put it-
example for
yeah,
somebody and it leads them into recovery, then that's a good thing. And I think, I think two things can be true at once. I think you can be humble, but also be proud about your recovery. And that's how
yeah,
I feel about it. Like, when I go to conventions, like, I don't know if you're kind of close to Baltimore, I don't know if you know about Ocean City.
yep,
They do a couple different conventions down at Ocean City a year. They do
yeah,
footprints and they do sessions. And when you go there and you see like the countdown that they do, to
yep,
me, that is one of the most inspiring things to see. I get emotional every time I see it, because it's just people, when you see people standing who have been sober for, 20, 30 years, and they're proud of it. I just think, to me, that's inspiring. To me, that inspires me. To me, that makes me want to go one more day of staying sober.
yeah.
And
I couldn't relate more too because when I first got into recovery, I went to rehab and I got off opiates after detoxing and doing rehab, IOP, all that kind of stuff. And I was introduced to the fellowships. So like when I relapsed last year, I wasn't, in my head, I'm like, I don't need to go to rehab. I need to go into meetings again.
mhm,
And I immersed myself back into AA. And then I found myself pulling away a little bit because NA is non-existent where I live in Pennsylvania. I'm from
mm,
South Jersey, but I live in the middle of nowhere in Pennsylvania now. And so I found the Zoom NA meeting that I do every day at noon.
Mhm.
And that meeting saved me because I can introduce myself as an alcoholic and an addict, which I do.
Mhm.
But I can talk about alcohol in my story. But most of all, I can talk about weed. I can talk about benzos. I can talk about opiates. And I found myself in AA kind of restricting how I talk because I wanted to respect the group and, confine your speech to alcohol and how it pertains to alcohol. So I
Yeah.
found myself restricting what was going on in me because of not being able to talk about Xanax or Valium or weed. So I was like, I need to change it up a little bit and start going to NA more. And I have a sponsor in both. And I talk to my sponsor in AA all the time. We live in the same apartment complex. He lives underneath me. So I see him all the time. We smoke cigarettes together and bullshit. So I'm still connected to the program. I just don't go to as many meetings anymore as opposed to I do NA every day at noon during the
Mhm.
work week. So you walk into AA, what was that feeling like? And all of a sudden did you feel accepted right away? What kind of meeting was that, your first meeting?
100%. My first meeting, like, when I hear people talk about how when they came into AA, they hated everybody, that was not my experience. Like, my first meeting, I truly had that feeling of like the first time in my life I was someplace I belonged. Like, was truly how I felt. And I saw people in there with like the lights on, and I saw people smiling and joyful and laughing, and like there was no joy and laughter in my life. I
Yeah,
mean, I had every reason to have it because I've got 2 great kids, I've got grandkids, like I had a lot of reasons to be joyful, but I was not. And when I
yeah,
walked in and I saw that, like, there's actually a story in the book, big book, that really describes my first experience. And yeah, I mean, I immediately, like, that compulsion and obsession with alcohol was immediately gone from day one. I can truly say that. That obsession was gone from my very first meeting. From my very first meeting, I fell in love with the program. I fell in love with being sober. And I just wanted to stay sober more than I wanted to drink after my very first meeting. And I went straight in, like, I right away. Within a couple weeks of my first meeting, I had a home group, I had a sponsor. I was like, I want to start working the steps. Like, I just wanted to be better. Um, and I did. And my first year, I did have, after my very first year, my first home group, I ended up having to leave. There was just some drama that was going on, like, some people were like sleeping together, and I had a friend that, was using my house. It was just, it was so traumatic. I don't want us to call it traumatic, but it was dramatic. And it
yeah.
was enough that I ended up leaving my first home group. And a lot of people have told me that that would have really, for a lot of people, that would have been like, oh, I'm done with AA. Like, a lot of people would have been like, but I was able to see that, like, part of that was my fault because I put people on pedestals, and I do that. Like, I put certain people on pedestals, and it wasn't AA that was the problem, it was these people. It wasn't,
Yeah.
I was able to separate because, I was just able to separate those people from the program.
Well, that attributes to the work you put into it when you first got into the program. When you first get into it, like I had my first sponsor, he worked at my rehab and he would take me to meetings. That was like his part of his job was to drive us to meetings.
Mhm,
And I went to all these meetings with him. He instilled a lot of things in me, like, right now we have the power of choice. We choose not to drink or use, but as soon as you drink or use again, you lose that power of choice. And it's 6 years, and I still remember him saying that to me 6.5 years ago.
mhm,
And he relapsed 3 months into him being my sponsor.
mm,
And I was talking to a friend of mine who ended up being my sponsor, and she told me, like, listen, everything he taught you is true, and remember the things he taught you. Just he unfortunately stopped listening to his own advice and decided to drink again or use meth, really. So don't let yourself think that everything you taught you was bullshit or a lie, and just continue. We're going to continue doing this together. And it was great advice, because I wasn't like, F this program, it didn't work for him, it's not going to work for me. If you know what I mean, like, I could have easily been discouraged from the fellowships and been like, well, that didn't work, I tried, I'm out of here. So I know exactly what you mean by separating the people from the program to know what you need to do in order to continue on your path.
Yeah. Yeah, and at that point in my like, after my first year, so the first time I tried to get sober, and like I said, I did a detox and I did an IOP, but I knew from the beginning of that I was not going to stay sober, because like in my mind, like I remember I kept thinking like, how do I go to a concert? How do I go to a ball game? How do I go to the beach and not drink? Like I just couldn't. Staying sober for the rest of my life was just too big for me. So my first sponsor, like one of the first things she did was like, she took me to a concert, like she took me to a ball game. Like she was like, she wanted to show me that I can still enjoy life as a sober person. And I did. I went to both those things. I had a great time. Like I was
If
able
not,
to
enjoy them
see
more. If not, you enjoy
absolutely
them.
100%. I enjoyed
I
those
saw
things
my
way more
brother.
sober.
Yeah, I saw my brother and sister get married completely sober. And I'm so glad, because I can recall everything from their weddings, standing up there in both of their weddings as a groomsman and just being part of the group. And I can remember every little detail about what happened at both. What I said, when I gave my best man speech for my brother, I was completely sober for. I didn't make an ass out of myself, being like all slurred, drunk. Like, oh, this is my brother Chris, and I wasn't like that. And it's funny you mentioned the laughter, because I did stand up comedy in addiction,
Mhm.
and I forgot how to laugh. I didn't learn how to laugh again until I started going to AA. And I remembered that this is how you laugh again, and you start laughing with your stomach, and you feel
Yeah.
the laughter, as opposed to in addiction, it was like a manufactured laugh where you hear something that is funny, and you go and you put on a fake laugh, as opposed to a real laughter that comes from your stomach. So
Yes.
I know exactly what you mean. And you said a year into it, you changed groups.
I changed home groups. Yeah, and so the home group I have now is they're a very spiritual group. So it just seemed to fit very well for me. I got a new sponsor. Um, yeah, and I try to stay involved. I still go to meetings every day. Um, I anytime I'm asked to speak, I always say yes. Yeah, so I just try to give back, and I sincerely mean it when I say that I owe this program a debt that I'll never be able to repay, because my life is good today. Like I said, I got 2 grown kids. My kids are 34 and 32. I've got 3 grandkids. My daughter got married. I got sober, like I said, October. My daughter got married in April. And I was, like you said about your brother's wedding, like I was at my daughter's wedding and I was completely sober. I remember every second. I was enjoying it. I danced my ass off at her wedding. Um, and I didn't make an idiot out of myself. I didn't have to wonder the
Apologize.
next day, what did I say to people? What did
Yeah,
I tell? Like
yeah.
it was none of that.
Yep.
Um, and now I got, a chance. My daughter's is pregnant with her second child. And my granddaughter, her first child is 2 years old. So I was still drinking when my daughter was pregnant with her first child. And when you look at the pictures of like the gender reveal and the baby
Baby
shower, like
shower.
I was there, but when you look at the pictures of me, like there's nothing in my eyes, because
The
I
light
was
bulb
just
went off.
waiting. Huh, yeah, like
The light
I
bulb
was
went
just
off.
white knuckling it, waiting until I could leave so I could go drink because I wasn't drinking around my daughter.
Yeah.
And you can just see it in my face that I'm just like not there. And, now that she's pregnant again, like now I have the opportunity to be the mother that I was not when she was pregnant with her first child. And at that point when my granddaughter was born, like I was drinking when I didn't want to. Like I remember the morning that so when my granddaughter was born, they were still doing COVID restrictions. So I wasn't able to go to the hospital. And I remember when I woke, and she had like a scheduled, like they were going to induce her. So I knew. And I woke up that morning and I kept thinking, I'm not going to drink today because what if something happens and I have to go to the hospital in an emergency? And I kept thinking all day long, I'm not going to drink. I'm not going to drink. But sure enough, by the time my daughter video called me to introduce me to my granddaughter, I was drunk because I couldn't at that point not drink. I was drinking every day. And I just couldn't not drink at that point.
Yeah.
Um, so it's, when I see it's just not hard for me. Like I have a friend who would tease me about, because I always say I love being sober, and I do have I'm just so grateful. Um, but it's not hard for me to make that leap when you see, like, from my family history and the traumatic things that I had happen, and to now to look at the fact that, I have a good job, I've got great, my kids are very self-sufficient. They both have their own families, they live on their own. Um, I've got a great fellowship and I've got great friends. So I don't have any of that if I'm not sober. So it's not hard for me to make that leap of gratitude. Sure, like there are definitely things about my life that I wish were better. My life certainly is not perfect. I can't seem to, you know, keep a romantic relationship around, but that's a whole other story. But the things that are good so outweigh what isn't. And I just, like I said, I have a friend that likes to tease me about how I always talk about how grateful I am, but I had a dad who was so my dad was a Marine. He did 3 tours in Vietnam, and then when he came back from Vietnam, he went into the police department. He was a homicide detective, and so my dad saw a lot of death in his life, and we talked about it, and we had conversations about gratitude and about, enjoying, your time on this earth and just being grateful that your feet hit the ground.
Yeah.
And we had lots of talks when he was sick. He died from Lou Gehrig's disease, which is a horrible disease, and he was sick for a long time. And we had talks about being grateful for every day that you're on this earth. And for many years after he died, I forgot about that, and I was just drinking away all the pain of missing him and not having him in my life and not having my mom in my life. And now that I'm sober, I'm able to be grateful, and I'm able to be grateful for the life I have and experiences. Even the bad experiences have, I try to find out what the lesson was. And,
It's
I
either
I
lesson
like I
or
said, I
lesson.
get made I have a friend that teases me about this stuff, but
So do I.
I
They don't
embrace it. I
understand.
think it makes me a better person.
Yeah, they don't understand. And it's not for me or you to make them understand. I have a friend that's just like, well, you can smoke weed still. Weed's not, there's nothing wrong with weed. I'm like, no, I was abusing it. I can't smoke weed. I would spend way too much money on it. I would hurt my lungs. I hurt my ribs because of having such bad coughing fits that I have costochondritis, where my ribs rub against the inside of my stomach when I cough, and I
Mhm.
get sharp pains. I was like, and I was overeating, and I gained a bunch of weight. I was like, so maybe there's no downsides for you to smoke, but there's plenty of downsides for me. And he's like, oh, you're over exaggerating. You can smoke still. And it's like, no, I'm done.
Yeah.
I'm done with it. Like, I'm 38 years old. I don't need to smoke weed every day anymore. And my wife quit smoking weed October 1st. She has MS, so she used it for a while,
Mhm.
for her pain and for her sleep and all that. But now she does recovery Dharma meetings, which is similar. It's a Buddhist approach to recovery. And she does meetings twice a day, and she's in one right now. And, it's been really great for her to quit cannabis. And for me, now we're a smoke free apartment. We don't have to worry. It was funny, 2 weeks ago, we needed a light bulb changed in our apartment. It was like in a fixture that we couldn't get off the wall or off the
Mhm.
ceiling. And we called maintenance. And usually when we called maintenance in the past, we would have to like hide all of our paraphernalia, make sure nobody smoked in the last 30 minutes, and do all that in case the maintenance man showed up at any given time to change the light bulb. And this time we were like, wow, we don't have to hide anything this time. We don't have to worry about when he's going to come to the apartment because we're not hiding anything anymore. And we gave away all of our bongs that we had, and we everything that we had left of weed we got rid of.
Mm.
So it was a really freeing feeling for both of us and she's been sleeping better now. She's getting used to it. She's on day 26. But yeah, I understand having that friend that's always like, well, you could still do it. It's no big deal. Like in my opinion, they just don't understand the depths that we fall into when we're drinking or using.
Yeah, I don't, and I don't, I don't judge anybody for how they choose to recover or how they, live their like if you can go out and drink or smoke weed or do whatever and not abuse it and still have your life be, functional and not mismanaged, great. I
More power
can't do
to
that.
you. Yeah.
I can't do that. I burn my life up when I do put anything into my body that alters my mind. So, I work my program, I go to meetings, I pray. You know, I'm I think try to be very in touch with my higher power, and that's what works for me.
That's awesome. Well, I'm glad, Traci, that you're doing so well. Thank you for coming on and talking about your history and your story and how you're staying sober today, because you know I try to get at least one person to watch each of these episodes, and I'm happy. I hope it connects with many people, but even if
Mhm.
it connects with one, that's a victory. I remember early on I was struggling with the numbers and like paying attention to how many people were watching, and a girl from England reached out to me on Instagram saying that she just watched like 8 of my episodes and she's going to get sober now.
Oh,
And
wow.
that kept me going for like another year, getting that kind of feedback. I was
Yeah.
like, okay, I am making a difference, and this is reaching people that I never would have expected to reach. So I have to continue the show in order to reach more people like her.
Right.
So, I love doing these. I'm going to be releasing, this is going to be probably one of 34 episodes in a row where I'm going to release an episode every single day from Thanksgiving to New Year's Eve to raise awareness around, relapses during the holidays. So yours will be in that clump of 34 episodes in a row. So I appreciate you coming on and sitting down and being so open and honest about your history.
Sure, sure. Yeah, thanks for having me on.
Of course. Have a great day.
Thanks, you too. Bye.